Let's get some more on this, and we're joined by the ABC's US political analyst, John Barron. John, welcome. It's interesting, isn't it? Because this was quite sensational when the initial details of this phone call were released soon after it happened in January. Question of the timing. Why are we getting the full transcript now?
That is the most important question, and the answer, of course, is unknown. Why 6 months later is the detail of this coming out? Who does it damage? Who looks bad as a result of this? Who is trying to achieve what? Now, one view in Washington right now is to say that this has probably come out of somewhere in the national security and intelligence community. Possibly this has gone to the State Department, the full transcript, and it has been leaked from there. Others have suggested, no, it's somebody from within the Trump White House trying to provide political cover for him to try and remind people that he was still talking tough on that Obama deal with Australia and the fact that he wanted Mexico to pay for the border wall. So there are very different views as to why this would possibly come out now, but the very fact that it has come out, we can't overlook the fact that a transcript of a phone call between the President of the United States and another national leader is highly, highly irregular. People are going back through the history books. Has this ever happened before? Nobody, it's certainly not within a 6 month time frame, maybe years after the event, but not in this kind of short time frame. So this is, no matter what else might or might not be achieved politically, who is this set to damage? Who is this set to make look good? We do know that it makes America look bad because Washington is still leaking like a sieve, and no world leader can now think they can have a one-on-one conversation with Donald Trump without it somehow, through some means, ending up in the Washington Post.
It's also a question of how Australia looks, and in particular Malcolm Turnbull. And at the time it was questioned, did he stand up to the president? Now we see a full transcript. How can we read that?
Well, David Frum, a former speechwriter for George W. Bush in The Atlantic this morning, describing Malcolm Turnbull as a bulldog from the way that he doggedly stuck to this is the agreement, this is the deal, you're a businessman, I'm a businessman, we know that you have to stick to a deal, if you can't stick to a deal, what have you got, etc. Malcolm Turnbull went through in some detail explaining to President Trump, who clearly had a very distorted view as to what the deal actually was. 2,000 baddies basically was what Donald Trump thought that they had agreed to. So Malcolm Turnbull is saying, no, it's 1,250. There is no obligation to accept any of them if your security vetting finds them to be unacceptable. But these aren't 2,000 bad Syrians, which is what Donald Trump thought it was. It's 1,200 people, mostly economic migrants from Afghanistan and Iran, who've already been on Manus Island for 3 years. Nothing really to do with Syria. So Malcolm Turnbull was trying to explain to Donald Trump why this wasn't so politically bad for him, because, of course, in those early days of his administration was when Donald Trump had announced that executive order banning migration from 7 majority Muslim countries, and this was a really unfortunate piece of timing for him to be having to explain this deal, and that's why when those sort of not the transcripts, but the accounts of the conversation leaked so early on, it became very problematic for Donald Trump. But supporters of Donald Trump would say, well, just this week he's thrown his weight behind a congressional Republican push to cut legal immigration in half from 1 million to 500,000 a year, modelled, interestingly, on Australia's skilled immigration
Australia
program.
and Canada, and I guess that goes to the heart of the phone call too, where he essentially compared the two, saying, gee, I thought I was tough, but you guys are actually tougher. Yeah. And he's looking to take some of that at least and apply it to the American system. Yeah,
he is. And to say, well, you know, how did you manage to do this deal? And so why boats in particular? Why are you banning boats in particular? So the president is not uncurious. Of course, there are those that are looking at it and saying, well, he's not prepared either. He really didn't know the policy that he was discussing. He didn't know the substance of the deal. So he put himself in a very poor negotiating position. If his objective was to, in fact, try and renegotiate the deal or signal to Malcolm Turnbull that he was not happy with this and not going to do anything, but then not going to do anything about it, which is essentially where it ended, it doesn't make President Trump look like a particularly strong negotiator.
Meanwhile, John, in Washington, accusations of Russian meddling in last year's election continue to dog the Trump administration. What's the latest development on that?
Latest is very bad news for Donald Trump. We know there is a special counsel, Robert Mueller, who's been looking into this whole affair. The Russian involvement in last year's election, which is pretty established, that they were trying to interfere in the election and they tried to help Donald Trump and defeat Hillary Clinton. The question has always been, to what extent did the Trump campaign collude with the Russians? Were they knowing that the fact they were getting help from the Kremlin and other Russian sources? So Bob Mueller is looking into all of this. The announcement today, a report in the Wall Street Journal saying that Bob Mueller has now impaneled a grand jury. And a grand jury is bad news because a grand jury can decide whether criminal indictments should be issued. And also, more importantly, if anyone gives evidence under oath to a grand jury and they lie, they make a misleading statement, then they're facing a perjury charge. And so it is often not the crime that gets you, it's the lie you tell at the grand jury is the thing that can be really problematic in a lot of these sorts of cases. So this is an area that Trump should be concerned about, and the fact that it's now widely reported that Bob Mueller is not just looking at Russian collusion, but also Donald Trump's business financial affairs, on the kind of ostensibly to sort of say, was Russia funneling money into the Trump Corporation for business deals or any other quid pro quo that we could identify there. But once you start looking at Donald Trump's finances, it seems Donald Trump starts to get quite nervous.
Because we've got another couple of parallel investigations running at the same time into this.
Yes.
So is this yet another one on top of that, which would have even greater power?
This is an expansion of the existing inquiry by Bob Mueller, and it's the most important because we have House and Senate Judiciary and Intelligence Committees all interested in what was going on with their different remits about was there obstruction of justice from Donald Trump, were there evidence from the intelligence community that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. But Bob Mueller is the one that has got the widest possible brief that presents the greatest possible danger to the presidency, whether it is through a possible obstruction of justice charge for when Donald Trump sacked the FBI Director James Comey in May, or it could come down to a business deal that was done on the sidelines of the Miss Universe pageant in 2013 in Moscow. The problem is, when a special counsel starts to investigate a real estate deal like with the Clintons and the Whitewater affair, you end up with Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office in a blue dress. These things can go into areas that you cannot predict at the start of such an inquiry, and that's why Bob Mueller is such a danger to Trump and why Trump is still pondering the idea of sacking Bob Mueller.
John, your head must still be spinning, trying to keep pace with what's unfolding in Washington at the moment. John Barron, thanks very much.
Thanks, Henry.